Sup people, welcome to 1,000 Words. My name is Radu, I'm a street photographer from Romania, and today we're talking about my first impressions of Lightroom as someone that's used free and open source software for their photo processing for the last half of a decade. Stick around, this is going to be interesting because my findings are quite shocking in many regards. I have notes. You know what I've realized recently? That actually doing a bit of planning, taking a few notes before shooting videos makes for a better video, does wonders to put a bit of order into my hectic mind. But now I have notes. So a bit of background first. Back in early 2019, I switched to Linux for all my computing needs. That was partly due to boredom, partly due to me being fed up with looking for cracks for all my software, because back then I really had no spare money to invest in buying subscriptions and licenses, so all that was left for me was to use pirated software. That came with quite a few drawbacks. The fact that you are usually a few versions behind. Also, there was the case of spyware and viruses. It was also due to curiosity because I had been using Windows my entire life, so Linux was something that really piqued my interest. The way I did it was kind of on a whim, but still I needed to find a good replacement for my needs, which were quite specific. I'm what you might call a power user because on the one hand I do process RAWs sometimes daily. On the other hand, I also have this YouTube channel which requires video editing. I also do very little now, but I used to do quite a bit of gaming in the past, so that also requires really well-functioning NVIDIA installation. And seeing how I have had Optimus laptops for close to a decade now. But the thing with Optimus laptops, for those of you that don't know, they have a discrete, dedicated NVIDIA GPU usually, and an onboard Intel graphics card. So they have been notoriously finicky for Linux to get working well. Also, I'm a bit of a nerd and I enjoyed the Linux experience, and I felt kind of like a MacGyver fellow trying to piece together a working computing environment out of things that don't necessarily come well functioning out of the box. So it was also with quite a bit of, let's call it, satisfaction when I eventually managed, after struggling, I eventually managed to get my system in a good working order. So it quickly became obvious that I had gotten to a place where I did have a very good working system. All my needs were met. I was able to do my work and my fun on that computer running Linux for years. But eventually, there was this nagging feeling that started gnawing at the back of my mind that I was missing out. Then eventually I started feeling like I wanted to simplify and optimize basically everything around me. I think it's something to do with age, and also perhaps this has something to do with my recent experience at that photography workshop at the Orthodox monastery. I've made a video about that. It became rather apparent that I wanted to make a change in the way I work and play, because I do a bit of gaming nowadays as well. So that meant that my tools needed to change, and I once again started looking into going back to Windows. Now, I had used Lightroom in the past, way back in the past. I think it was 2016. I did have an opinion on Lightroom, which was not really all that favorable. And that was the reason for me not giving a lot of thought to Lightroom in the first place, because I also was very curious about what has happened in the last 5 years in the photo processing space. I knew about quite a few other programs that have been made, so I gave a few of them a try. I tried DXO Photolab. That was the one that felt really interesting. It also had quite a friendly business model. It didn't require a subscription, and that's always a nice thing. It's a one-time down payment, and then you owe the program forever. So I gave that a try. It was all right, but I felt that it was kind of lacking as far as organization tools go. The interface also was a bit iffy as far as I'm concerned. But seeing how I was really accustomed to raw therapy, which can be rather dense and intimidating, a very complex beast at that, Photolab didn't intimidate me. It felt like something I could get accustomed to. But there was others, so I tried on one raw. That was kind of meh. A bit too much AI for my liking, also very meh. So I quickly glanced it over and tried Affinity Photo. Now that's basically like a Photoshop alternative. Sure, it can process RAWs, but completely lacking in any sort of organizational tools. There's no albums, there's no collections, I don't think there's even a tree structure view of your files. You just load your RAWs one by one, and while very, very accessible as far as cost goes, I didn't really like at all. Then there was Luminar Neo, which I tried just because I needed to see for myself what the whole business was with it, because I kept seeing a lot of ads about it and sponsored videos and whatnot. But I quickly realized that it's way too much AI in that program for my taste. And while the interface is pretty, it's still kind of meh. I really didn't like that. So after having tried the big ones, I finally settled on a photography plan from Adobe, which gives me Lightroom and Photoshop. Before I get into the specifics of things, my first impressions of Lightroom in 2025, I want to spoil things for you right here and right now. I think the value proposition is amazing. It has simply blown my mind. Now, first up, I think Lightroom is extremely intuitive and easy to use, and I love that about it. During my first days using it, I often had this eerie and quite surprising feeling that I was kind of like cheating, because while on the one hand, raw therapy, my previous raw processor of choice, is kind of dense and really complex, I had eventually developed a workflow that really worked well for me. I was able to process a RAW in just under a couple of minutes. Now, with Lightroom, I'm able to do the same thing in basically 20 to 30 seconds. It's so damn easy, so user-friendly, so intuitive. It's really well laid out that I find it a joy to work with. It's also surprisingly fast and efficient once it gets started, because if I'm honest, there's also a few things that are going against it, and one of them is the fact that it's really kind of slow to start. But once it does start, it just kind of works well and quickly and rapidly. It's pretty damn fast. Also, it's practically perfect in terms of organizational tools. It's got importing presets. I have a workflow where I store my JPEGs in a different folder, in a whole different directory structure, separate of my RAWs. So I need the program to download, rename, adding a suffix, and store files in a directory structure that's something like year/year-month/year-month-day. So Lightroom does this automagically, both with RAWs, also with JPEGs. There's also catalogs, there's also collections. The organizational tools in Lightroom are really, I think, best in class. There's also exporting tools which I think are great. Just like importing, I have a workflow which requires me to often save or export RAW in 3 different sizes and naming schemes, because I save a full resolution JPEG. Then I need JPEG that's good for uploading on the web, which has to have the underlying web suffix and also has to have 2048 pixels on the longest size. And I also need a 4K image for my YouTube video reviews, which has to have an underline 4K suffix and 3840 pixels on the longest side. So this is all work I'm getting done very easily and quickly using presets, saving presets, renaming presets. Lightroom is just fantastic in that way. Then there's the Adobe portfolio side of things, also included in my photography plan, which has allowed me to build my very own website. Me being somebody that knows absolutely zero web design and development, and it has allowed me to save perhaps thousands. I know a friend of mine has spent 2,500 euros on a website. Perhaps his website is more customizable, seeing how it's probably made from scratch, but it's 2,500 euros that I'm not spending, and I'm getting a really good website. I'm really loving the way it's turned out. There's also Adobe fonts. Don't really use a lot of fonts, but there's added value. There's also Adobe Firefly, and while on the one hand I'm a bit weary of AI, on the other hand I can think of a few situations where I would need AI. Just recently I used Adobe Firefly to generate a thumbnail for a video of mine, and I'm not going to do that a lot, but for the once in a blue moon situation when I do need that, it's great to have that there. Now, through the magic of editing, I've teleported myself back to home at my computer, where I want to show you some side-by-side comparisons of images edited in RAW therapy on the left side and in Lightroom on the right side. First up is just how much more contrast there is in the sky. Now, sure enough, Lightroom's masking tools are much superior to the masking and local adjustment tools available in RAW therapy, but that's not really the point of it. The point I'm trying to get across is, first up, I've tried to mostly go for the same kind of edit. There is a bit of a difference, but I've mostly tried to keep the atmosphere the same, the tonal range the same, the colors, I went for the same kind of white balance. For the most part, I think I succeeded in that, although the image on the left here edited in RAW therapy seems to be somewhat colder. However, some contrast, some saturation, and the sky is just simply popping. That's not the most interesting part for me. More so than anything, it's the sheer crispness of the image. Let's just zoom into 100% and be mindful of the size of these images. I've intentionally used web versions of these images, which is to say they have 2048 pixels on the longer edge. These are basically what now, like 3 megapixels. Let's do 2048 times 1367. It's just shy of 3 megapixels. That's really small resolution, a small size, and I've done this intentionally because I don't want this to turn into a pixel peeping contest, because it's not what this is about. First of all, the colors are much nicer here. There's simply a more natural gradation. If you check the hues here, let's just zoom in further a bit, 160%. Yeah, there's more vibrant, more saturated tones of orange here, and they're fading into a more peach-like tone here. And you also see here the gradation between more saturated to less saturated, and here it's all the same. It's practically the same hue from here to here, and I find this simply testament to how much better the raw processing is in Lightroom. I will show you a bit later where Lightroom falls slightly short of raw therapy, but in all other respects I I think it's simply superior. If we're talking about crispness, just check the details here and here. They're so much cleaner, so much crisper. Surfaces have this shiny, almost like a marble feeling to them. This feels a bit rougher. This looks shiny. This looks like you could touch it. It's very much more 3D, I dare say. There seems to be some perspective in here, some depth. I even dare call it 3D pop. And these are obviously enough the same image taken with the same lens, just edited differently. This seems to be flatter. Now, if we're taking a look here in the foliage here, it's the same zoom, 121%. It's obvious that there is more color information in the JPEG exported from Lightroom. In this image here, processed in raw therapy, the greens and yellows are very difficult to tell apart. It's basically the same mushy green. And this is not to do with editing, because in this Lightroom variant, it's obvious the distinction between the yellow leaves here and the green leaves here. These leaves here all look basically the same. Sure enough, there's a bit of a difference here, but it's just so much better looking here. Even across the image, there's more detail. It looks cleaner. Look at the tiles here, the roof of the building. This looks cleaner. This looks like it's muddy. This looks grayish. And sure enough, maybe you could get the same result in raw therapy, but my point is that this is easily achievable, while this in raw therapy is more difficult. Now let's scoot over to this set. This is edited in raw therapy. This is edited in Lightroom. Here the difference is not as noticeable. However, there's still something I want you to notice. There's more detail here. You look at the clouds here. Also here, there's simply a lot more detail. Even here in the water and this trail of smoke here, it's more visible. There's more detail here in the clouds. It's simply more detailed. Next set of images. This is yet another example, a testament of how much better Lightroom is in handling noise. Raw therapy does a decent enough job at noise reduction, but it's certainly last generation, while the noise reduction in Lightroom is current generation AI stuff. It's simply lots better. There's so much more detail here. You can easily tell apart color in the clouds here. And if we move over to the roof of the building here, just notice the difference. The texture is much more visible here. It's much nicer, much crisper. There's lots more detail, while this is mushy. There's some color noise as well. Even if I chose to get rid of color noise in raw therapy, there is still some left, while this is just crisp and clean. Notice how much cleaner detail is in the cross here on the benches, the person reading here. That just goes to show how much of a difference Lightroom makes. It's easy. These are the masks I use here. A mask for the foreground, a mask for the church here, and the mask with a gradient for the sky here. It's simply child's play. Frankly, it's not supposed to be this easy. Frankly, it feels like cheating. It's just so easy to get a great result that it's simply kind of mind-blowing. And just for the sake of example, let's go ahead and try to process a couple of images very quickly and just show you how easily you can get excellent results. I'll just start cropping here, go for this pillar to designate our horizon line. Usually I find that the auto white balance is practically flawless in Lightroom. Yet again, this proves to be the case. monochrome. I like this image a lot, as grainy as it is. Sure, I could go ahead and denoise the living daylights out of this, but I think even with a really low setting, I don't basically ever go higher than 35 here. But even now, let's give this a try. At 25% noise reduction, and this is the AI noise reduction, not the manual last generation noise reduction that has been available. Even with 25% AI noise reduction, I think the image is lacking. It's losing in regards to the atmosphere. It just seems kind of mushy. The noise reduction is evident. Sure, you could go ahead and do some detail reconstruction by introducing detail and some grain. Let's give it a bit of a rougher size, a bigger size I mean, and some roughness. And sure enough, it's kind of like, it's better, but I'm not sure if I don't actually prefer the one without noise reduction. But let's go ahead and continue editing. I'll just raise the exposure a bit, give it some more contrast, take the highlights down because this part right here is really kind of blinding me. So is the faces. I think it's a bit overexposed. I think this could do with some masking. Take the whites down a bit. Take the blacks down a bit. There's no need for added texture or clarity. Perhaps a bit of dehazing. Some more contrast with a bit of an S-curve. And this is basically all I do to it. It's practically all I do to it. Let's just, for the fun of it, try to mask an object. And let's tell Lightroom this is the object, and let's see how well it does. It's stupid. It's really damn stupid how good it is. It's really kind of dumb how easy it is. And take the highlights down, and look, it's basically child's play. It's basically child's play. Let's try and select subject. It even found the beard. This works actually really great. Let's not overdo it. Great! This image. I like this one. So let's go for the straightening too. That's a bit too much. This is good enough. Okay, so let's try to pick our white balance from here. I think it's a bit too green, maybe here. Could work. Then go for the monochrome. Bit of a bump in exposure, quite a bit more contrast. Take the highlights a bit down, raise the shadows a bit, quite a lot actually. Take the blacks down, check for clipping using the J key. Take the whites higher a bit for some added contrast, a bit of texture, a bit of clarity, yet more contrast with the S curve here. I think this is a bit overpowering, and I will try to tone it down a bit, as is the white patch here. As far as sharpening goes, I will use the Alt key while dragging masking here to only select the edges, because it's only here that I want the sharpening to actually work. Okay, this is basically it. This is an image shot at ISO 120. This image is shot at ISO 125, so there's simply no noise reduction needed at all. I do want to correct the sky part here and tone this down. Let's try for a mask here, and let's try and see if the program will find the sky for us. And sure enough, it did. And it did a pretty good job at it. And tone down the highlights a bit. That's way too much. This works, and I'll try to create new mask. Brush. And if brush doesn't work, let's try with the auto mask. If brush doesn't work, we'll use the luminance range. But sure enough, masking with auto masking on does a pretty good job at it. That's way too much. Take the contrast as low as it can go. Exposure. Take the shadows up. Take the whites a bit down. And that's basically it. I think it's good. Let's actually give it a bit of a vignette. Like this. So just notice that, and this is actually with me talking and trying out things, because usually I don't use masks on my street photography, and I'm done with a picture in under 30 seconds. Let's wrap things up with this one, an image that will not require any masking. Let's go for the auto white balance. Let's go for the monochrome. Let's take the contrast up a bit. Let's tone down the highlights a bit. Let's raise the shadows, whites a bit. Take the blacks down a bit. Check for clipping. There's a bit of a clip there, but not enough to worry. +5 to texture, +5 to clarity, because this was shot on a vintage lens, the Konica 40mm f1.8, and it's a bit soft. It does benefit from a bit of extra texture. Let's choose our focus here, detail. Make our mask, take the detail a bit higher, the radius a bit lower, the amount a bit like this. Hold down Alt and disable, enable, disable, enable. I think it did some wonkiness for only working on the edges. This is basically it. There's still a bit of clipping here, but I don't mind crushing the blacks sometimes. And yeah, I forgot to show you one last thing, I promise. I want to very briefly talk about the mosaicing, and for this we're going to need the full resolution images. Now, I won't go into what the mosaicing is and how it works and why it's important. I'll perhaps do another video for that. Go ahead and Google it if you're interested. But I'll just go ahead and ask you to check the very fine edges here. Like here, for instance. Notice how there's quite a bit more jagginess. There's simply more jagginess on edges. Check out the edges on these stairs here. This is where Lightroom is lacking quite a bit. It's lagging behind raw therapy. It's very noticeable once you really know what to look for. 380%. Check out the edge here. It's much more jagged. It's like almost like aliasing. Whereas in the image processed by raw therapy, the edge is much nicer, much cleaner. So yeah, it's sadly an area where Lightroom really falls behind, and I'm really not sure why Adobe doesn't allow us to at least choose from a few debayering, because it's the same thing with demosaicing, a few demosaicing algorithms. But other than that, I think there's really no way around the fact that Lightroom is simply much better than raw therapy. So then there's Photoshop, which is in and of itself amazing value by itself. It usually is a standalone application that you have to buy it. If you're, there's Affinity Photo. There's, I'm not even sure what other alternatives there are up there, but the fact that you have Photoshop included with the photography plan, it's simply mind-blowing. And all of this for, I'm paying like 930 euros a month for a year. I have this deal for a first-time user, I guess. Before I move on, there's a trick I used. Just after I created my account and set up my plan, I threatened to leave. I went to my account, I managed plan, I said there I want to cancel my account, and Adobe offered me 2 months for free, so I have 3 months where I pay 930 euros, so that's basically 3 euros a month until March, when my next payment is. That's less than I pay for beers when I go out by myself. That's when I'm not eating out. That's simply crazy value. It's really insane. So here I now am, tying myself for a full year. Yearly commitment to Adobe, this greedy corporation that's been getting some really bad press recently, and I'm no fool about it. May very well be entirely merited, because there was this whole shenanigan with Skip the Photo Shoot, which enraged a lot of photographers. There was also the fact that it has been proven that they use users' stock image and footage to train their AI, and also apparently Adobe's been sneaking their way into people's projects, also using that to train their AI. There's also the fact that they've recently hiked their subscription costs. What is now 930, actually it's 950, I think, for the first year for a first-time user. It's going to be 15 euros a month. That's actually, I think that's all right. Now, that's kind of funny coming from me. Just a few months ago, I was using Linux and free and open source software. Now I'm paying money to a greedy corporation, and I'm okay with it. It's even if we're talking about 15 euros a month. If you add all that up and multiply it by 12, because usually it's yearly that companies come up with major versions, it's still less than I would have to pay for something like DXO Photolab. And that's not offering nearly as good in regards of organizational tools. That's not offering a website builder. That's not offering fonts. That's not offering AI. That's not offering Photoshop. It's really an insane value. Once you leave all preconceived notions behind and really think of it pragmatically, it's actually making me feel really good about my choice. At the end of the day, it's really about spending the least amount of money possible to get the most value for my buck. And I'm really satisfied, and I'm confident when I say this. As far as I'm concerned, for little old me, there's really no better alternative. And I haven't even mentioned Capture One. I will just briefly say that their 30 euro a month subscription plan, together with the fact that their licenses, if you decide to purchase a license outright, if I'm not mistaken, those that buy a license have less features than those that pay a subscription, and their subscription cost is simply outrageous. It's 3 times the amount I pay now. And yet again, there's no Photoshop, there's no that, there's no that, there's no that. There's really no way around it. Lightroom is shockingly good. And I didn't even get into the masks of it. Because being a street photographer, I don't use masks all that much. But if I'm honest about it, it's simply amazing. Sure, Capture One has caught up with masks, perhaps, but nobody else in the business has masks as easily, as good as Lightroom does. It's practically perfect. However, it's not. If I'm being honest, there's a few things that rub me the wrong way about Lightroom. And sure enough, these could be put down in the category of nitpickings, because it's frankly kind of superficial, but hey, nothing's ever perfect, so we need to talk about this. Like I mentioned, the app is kind of slow to start. I have a pretty good computer. It's 8-core hyper-threaded, so that's 16 cores. We're talking about 32 gigs of RAM, and the app is kind of slow to start. You have to wait for it and wait for it. Now, sure enough, once it does start, it's pretty snippy, kind of fast. But the startup time could sure do with some improvement. There's also the fact that we're in 2025, and I feel like each and every application should at least give you the option to choose a dark mode. Frankly, I'm just going to go ahead and say that I simply can't understand you psychopaths out there that use other than dark mode. Having a bright interface sear your eyes at 500, 700 nits, I can't understand this. So for me, dark mode is a must. And while sure enough, the application is rather gray, there's the top bar that's kind of bright. There's also the context menus that are also not adhering to the system-wide dark mode. And this is kind of frustrating and infuriating because I know Lightroom is capable of showing dark mode context menus. How do I know this? Because I've seen it. Once or twice, intermittently and randomly, the app will show context menus in dark mode. So I know it can do that. Of course, there's no way for the user to choose this willingly, but the app will bug out occasionally and show dark mode context menus. Why Adobe? Why not put a tick in there? Use dark mode. Or just thinking about the amount of developers you have at your disposal, this is simply blowing my mind. What else as far as drawbacks? I talked about the slow startup times, I talked about the context menus. Yeah, there's another thing. Once you have, there's actually two things. Once you have your program minimized in the taskbar, if you click the icon to maximize it back up, it will flash white for a few brief seconds until it populates the interface with all these sliders and buttons, like it's 1999 and I only have 2 gigs of RAM available. Wake up, Adobe. It's 2025. I have 32 gigs of RAM at my disposal. Surely it's bad designing on your part and not insufficient RAM on my part. Then there's also the fact that, and this is a well-known bug, I've searched for it on the internet and people have talked about this before. There's the Alt-Tab bug where it seems like the OS will not recognize Lightroom as a running app until you press Alt-Tab a second time. Usually when you Alt-Tab, even if very briefly, it will immediately switch to your next open application. Now, with Lightroom open, you have to Alt-Tab, then you have to Alt-Tab again, and only then it will recognize Lightroom as a running application and allow you to switch to the next running application. That's kind of shitty. I mean, sure, it's not anything that's game-breaking. That's not anything that will hinder my workflow in any significant manner, but still, it's something that rubs me the wrong way. All that said, and despite the bad press Adobe's been getting recently, I really feel good about my decision to tie myself to Adobe and their photography plan, because It's easy to use, it's really convenient. It actually replaced 3 whole separate programs in my photography workflow alone. When I was on Linux, I used to have the Rapid Photo Downloader app, which downloaded photos off of my SD card, renamed them, and saved them in a structure of my own choosing. Lightroom does this. Then I used to do most of my processing with raw therapy, and Lightroom does this. Then I would use to finish up my work with GIMP, and I'm able to completely process a RAW from start to finish in Lightroom alone, even with adding grain and masks and local adjustments and healing brush and cloning stuff out. And in closing, Lightroom is fantastic. It's really second to none. I'm actually kind of shocked at how good it is and how much value you get for a couple beer worths of money for an entire month. It's simply kind of unbelievable. This has been practically all. I have been Radu. This has been a million words, no doubt about it. I'll see you next time. Until that, farewell.